This is Lucy Gayheart, Book 2, Chapter 3. As Lucy was coming in from the orchard just before sunset, she found Pauline waiting for her on the back porch with a cape over her shoulders. "Lucy, you'll take cold. You shouldn't be out there after 4 o'clock without a coat on. I never would make you wear clothes enough when you were little. It's just the same now. Mrs. Ramsay called again and wants to speak to you. You will have to go there tonight." Lucy said she supposed she must. There was only one thing she really liked to do in the evening. She and her father had been playing some sonatas of Mozart after he came home from the shop. He had a harsh tone with the violin, but he seems to enjoy playing with her so much that she enjoyed it too. After supper, she walked toward the town and turned into the street that people jokingly called Quality Street, because Mrs. Ramsay lived at one end of it and the Gordons at the other. Mrs. Ramsay was sitting in her high-backed chair beside the big front window, the shades up and silk curtains drawn back. This had always been her way, though her house was so near the sidewalk that every passerby could gaze in. Her neighbors sometimes said it looked as if she were giving a reception to the street. As a little girl, Lucy had loved to come to this house, such comfortable rooms, old-fashioned furniture, and soft, flowered carpets. She used to like the feeling that here there was a long distance between the parlor and the kitchen, that they were not always being mixed up together as they were at home. Mrs. Ramsay was then the only woman in town who kept 2 maids. Mrs. Harry Gordon kept a man and his wife, Pauline had told her. Lucy kissed Mrs. Ramsay's cheek and sat down at her side, on the bamboo stool with the red cushions where she used to sit when she was learning to crochet. Nothing ever changed in this house, and there was something in the air of it that one was glad to come back to. The house had some reality, had color and warmth, because the woman who made it and ruled it had those things in her nature. "Lucy, dear, you aren't treating me as well as you always used to. Have I grown too old for you at last?" Lucy murmured that she didn't like to visit her friends when she was dull and out of sorts. She had stayed in the city and worked all summer, and that didn't turn out very well. When fall came, I was not good for anything. My teacher's wife packed my things for me, and I let her do it. Think of that. Mrs. Ramsay patted her hand. So it wasn't that Lucy had displeased her teacher and been sent away, as some people said. "Well, my dear, if you don't feel like talking, you might come in and play for me sometimes. I had the piano tuned as soon as I heard you were home. And there it stands. Madge never touches it." Lucy brightened. "Would you like that? I think I would. We have only the old upright at home, you know. The one at Father's shop is a little better, but it bothers me to have people coming in and out. I didn't used to mind when I was a girl." "A girl? Good gracious! What are you now, I'd like to know?" "No, you mustn't practice much while you are at home. You look tired, my dear, and you walk tired. You need a long rest and country air, and there's no air like the Platte Valley. Denver's too high, Chicago's too low. There are no autumns like ours anywhere. The fall we spent in Scotland, I count lost out of my life. Mr. Ramsay would have it, and he got enough of it." Yes, Lucy said. She was glad to be at home. A whole year of the city had been too much. "But it was a good year, wasn't it? You must have been enjoying your work, or you wouldn't have stayed. And I hope you had plenty of fun along with it. I don't like to see young people with talent take it too seriously. Life is short. Gather roses while you may. I'm sure you gathered a few. Lucy smiled indulgently. A few. Make it as many as you can, Lucy. Nothing really matters but living. Get all you can out of it. I'm an old woman, and I know. Accomplishments are the ornaments of life. They come second. Sometimes people disappoint us, and sometimes we disappoint ourselves. But the thing is to go right on living. You've hardly begun yet. Don't let a backward spring discourage you. There's a long summer before you, and everything rights itself in time. Lucy sat wondering why it was she could not talk to her old friend. On her way down here tonight, she had been thinking she would ask Mrs. Ramsay to summon Harry Gordon to this very parlor some afternoon. No one refused any requests of hers. To give her a chance to talk with him and to be present at the interview. But now she found she couldn't do it. She rose with a sigh and went over to the piano. She played for nearly an hour. She liked playing on this piano again. It was the only good one in town. Long ago, she had supposed it must be one of the best in the world. Mrs. Ramsay sat straight in her high-backed chair, her elbow on the arm, her head resting lightly on the tips of her fingers. Had Mrs. Ramsay turned and looked out of the window, she would have seen a man's tall figure go somewhat pompously by. The blind was still up, and the interior of the lighted room was as clear to the passer-by as a stage setting when the theater is dark. At the corner, he did not go straight north, as his way led, but turned and walked west, along the sidewalk that bordered Mrs. Ramsay's flower garden and carriage house. He had been seized by a fierce impulse to go straight to her front door and into the parlor. He almost did it. Now, he meant to walk around the block and look in on that scene again. But by the time he reached the west corner, he had recovered himself, and he resumed his way north. It had only knocked him out of his course 1 block, his pride told him. That wasn't much of a knock. In little towns, lives roll along so close to one another. Loves and hates beat about, their wings almost touching. On the sidewalks along which everyone comes and goes, you must, if you walk abroad at all, at some time pass within a few inches of the man who cheated and betrayed you, or the woman you desire more than anything in the world. Her skirt brushes against you. You say good morning and go on. It is a close shave. Out in the world, the escapes are not so narrow. End of Chapter 3, Book 2. Lucy Gayheart, Book 2, Chapter 4. Lucy returned from her call on Mrs. Ramsay in a cheerful mood and went to bed. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Pauline was awakened by a cry of fright in the next room, a cry of pleading and terror. Then there was a smothered whimpering that made her shiver. Once, a puppy run over by a wagon in front of their house had cried like that. It was not the first time that Lucy had cried in her sleep. Usually she soon wakened, and then Pauline could hear her turning in bed and changing her pillows. She had never gone in to speak to her sister. She was afraid, really. There was something the matter with Lucy, no doubt of that, and Pauline was glad she had let the apple orchard alone. It must be good for her to be out there in the sun. In her own way, Pauline loved her sister, though there had been moments when she certainly hated her. Personal hatred and family affection are not incompatible. They often flourish and grow strong together. Everything that was most individual and characteristic in Lucy, she resented. But she was loyal to whatever she thought was Gayheart. When someone praised Lucy's playing, Pauline usually said, "Oh yes, all the Gayhearts are musical. If my voice had been cultivated." Pauline was the soprano and director of the Lutheran choir. Pauline was a much more complex person than her sister. Her bustling, outright manner was not quite convincing for all of its vehemence. One felt that it had very little to do with her real feelings and opinions, whatever they might be. She was, so to speak, always walking behind herself. The plump, talkative little woman one met on the way to choir practice or at afternoon teas was a mannequin which Pauline pushed along before her. No one had ever seen the pusher behind the familiar figure, and no one knew what that second person was like. Indeed, Pauline told herself that she put up a front. She thought it very necessary to do so. Her father was queer, not at all like the real businessmen of the town, and Lucy certainly was not like other people. Someone had to be normal, a word Pauline used very often, and keep up the family standing in the community. When Lucy was a child, Pauline was very fond and proud of her, as if she were a personal ornament reflecting credit on herself. She was only 18 when her mother's death left Lucy entirely to her care. Friends and neighbors often praised the way in which she brought the little girl up. Pauline had loved looking at her, indeed, and though she was often perplexed by the child's wild bursts of temper and her trick of running away. It was not until Lucy was old enough to go to high school that Pauline began to be jealous of her. Then she realized that everyone, even the Lutheran pastor and the Frau pastor, had one manner with her and another one with Lucy. Mrs. Ramsay and Harry Gordon's mother were always sending for Lucy on one pretext or another. Pauline was asked to their houses only when they gave a church supper or a benefit for the firemen. And Lucy's father spoiled her. That was Pauline's sorest jealousy. If at breakfast she told Lucy to come directly home after school and help her with the ironing, Mr. Gayheart was very apt to say that she must stop first at the shop and do her practicing. After months of brooding, Pauline went into her father's room one Sunday afternoon and told him she would like to have a talk with him. Was she to go on having all the cares of the house now that Lucy was old enough to share it? Was that fair to her? Or good for Lucy? Mr. Gayheart put down his newspaper and turned in his chair to face his daughter. It is more important that she does her music well and sits at the piano where I can watch her. If there is too much to do here, get one of Kohlmeyer's daughters to help you. You can get one for $1 a day. Pauline protested that it was not herself, but Lucy she was thinking of. Was it good for a girl to grow up heedless and always to be waited on? I mean her to grow up at the piano. She will do more good there, and that is where she belongs. Gayheart took up his paper again. The piano is in the parlor, Pauline said to herself as she went back into her own room. It has always been like that. The parlor cat and the kitchen cat. Mr. Gayheart thought his elder daughter a girl of good common sense. She must see that Lucy was different. Everybody saw that. Therefore, she should make no fuss about it. Harry Gordon was less obtuse. He knew that Pauline was jealous. Whenever he met her on the street or when she came into the bank on business, he made a point of being cordial, and he always sent her a big box of candy at Christmas time. He seldom went to the house, however, even to see Lucy, merely called for her to take her for a drive or to a dance. Pauline knew she would be quite as popular in the town as Lucy, if she were as pretty. Indeed, she was popular. People said Pauline is level-headed. Since that was the role she affected, she shouldn't have minded. But she did mind, very much. People were always stopping her on the street to ask when Lucy would be back from Chicago. The old ladies beamed at her with expectant eyes when they said how pretty Lucy was growing, as if Pauline should beam too. She did her best, but a rather greenish, glowworm gleam it was. Lucy had never been aware of any of these hidden feelings in her sister. Her thoughts ran outward, and she was usually all aglow about something, even if it was just the weather. She hadn't the least idea of what Pauline was really like, never considered it. Pauline had brought her up, taken care of her when she was sick, made birthday and Christmas parties for her. Pauline was good, and good people were usually fussy and a little tiresome. Home, for some reason, was a place where she never felt entirely free, except in the orchard and the attic. Though Lucy would stoutly have denied such a charge, the truth was that Pauline's housekeeping was more pretentious than efficient. In spite of her bustling manner, Pauline was really, like her father, very indolent. Where there is one grievance, there are likely to be many. Pauline had never felt that her father could afford to send Lucy away to study. Lucy had earned nothing during her first 2 winters in Chicago. Mr. Gayheart paid for her lessons and her living expenses. That was why he was always short of money, and why Pauline had to raise onions. If Lucy had been apologetic and humble and had practiced small economies, she would have been less to blame in her sister's eyes. But not at all. She never seemed to think about money. When she had any, she spent it gaily. She refused to be poor in spirit. One expectation had enabled Pauline to put up with Lucy's easy ways and to endure this alarming drain on the family resources. The one thing that Lucy could have done to repay her family for the sacrifices they had made for her would have been to marry Harry Gordon. Pauline had counted on that. And now it had come to nothing, worse than nothing. People were feeling sorry for the Gayhearts. Pauline held her chin high, but her pride smarted at the thought that Lucy had been jilted. She was jealous of Lucy and for Lucy at the same time. Here comes the subway. Good timing. That's the end of Chapter 4, Book 2 of Lucy Gayheart.